We've been doing a lot of technical stuff lately, so I figured it was time to take a breather from that and talk about what Diablo 2 does right and what it does wrong. In today's video, we're going to cover the latter, the 5 things that I dislike about Diablo 2. But don't worry, the things I love about the game will be coming soon enough. Number 5. Stamina. I love stamina systems in most games, but that's because we figured out how to balance them properly. When Diablo 2 released, stamina limiters were still a bit of the Wild West and were used a lot of different ways. Unfortunately, they chose to have it impact one thing and one thing only: how fast you can move. Widely considered probably one of the worst parts of the game's design, stamina is one thing that I wanted to kind of get out of the way early because all it does is ruin the tempo of the game rather than adding tension like other stamina systems. Number 4. Synergies. You might be hearing from this one again, but it deserves its place on this list as well. While synergies can be amazing tools to incentivize building-focused builds and making players be a bit more distinct, it can also be extremely limiting when the game is balanced around the top end of this, making multiplayer or skipping enemies a necessity for some builds rather than an option. The synergy system is specifically on here though, since there are soft synergies and hard synergies, which can be very confusing for new players and even some old players. That and some of the synergy choices are just straight up mind-boggling. I mean, seriously, what does Vigor have to do with magical hammers? Though I also give synergies crap because they lead us into... Number 3. Immunities. I'm fine with immunities on bosses and such, and occasional enemies when they make sense, but I find the blanket immunities for, well, entire classes of enemies a bit meh. Or simply, it makes sense for an enemy made of fire to be immune to fire, but a little fleshy meat nugget being immune to lightning? Not so much. Though outside of that trivial immersion concern, they are honestly the main reason why certain niche builds that used to be popular died off, especially with how inconsistently it is implemented on, well, pretty much everything. If you're ever wondering why I tie them to synergies on this list, it's because they implemented this and a handful of other changes to counteract the strength synergies gave to certain abilities. Number 2. Online exclusives. While we have ways to counter them with mods and such, I have always found things that require you to be online to experience to be rather rough. Namely, the Runeward restrictions and the Pandemonium events in the game. Really kind of irritating not to have in there. I have always felt that these should be part of the single player experience, even if they wanted to change some of the requirements for things like Uber Diablo spawn or something more single player thematic. I've always felt weird having these be online exclusive. Now, it is worth noting, I don't actually mind these being ladder exclusive, since that's online versus online. It's just the positioning of offline versus online that I find kind of gross. Number 1. Gloams. Am I being serious or am I joking? You may never know, but you probably should have guessed that they would be on here, since I really don't like them, and I'm open about it. They're one of the only enemy that aggros from, well, outside visual range, and they've got that combined with some massive damage that is especially nasty on Hell difficulty. There really is no counter to them outside of just overloading on resist and absorb, whereas every other scary enemy has a counter, whether it's undead dolls, scarabs, or even hardcore character ending snakes in Neelathak's tomb. It has a technique counter rather than a gear luck counter for pretty much every single one of those. It's positioning and using your mercenary and stuff like that. So anyway, what things do you love or hate about Diablo 2? Were there some that I missed, or some you just straight up disagree with? Mention them down below.